¿Qué lo que, mi gente? Víctor Coronado aquí with Anticonquista, alongside compañeros Nick and Miguel, and very excited to also be with Natalia Urban. Natalia Urban is a independent journalist, um, and so you can check her out at Urban Natalia. That's at Urban Natalia on Twitter. And we're very excited to say that and announce that Natalia will be joining us as a collaborator. So she's going to be part of the Anticonquista team. So this is her debut, and we're really excited about that. How's everybody doing?
Great. How are you?
Pretty good, man. Pretty good.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we titled this "Russia-Ukraine Crisis: A Third Worldist Perspective." I'm pretty sure as many folks out there, we've been covering or reviewing, a lot of the mainstream press coverage alongside, some of the, let's say, progressive mainstream or progressive coverage or coverage coming from the progressive outlets as well as different Marxist and so-called Marxist outlets. So we wanted to join the discussion. And there's a lot to talk about here. We're going to get into a lot of different talking points, a lot of different things that are maybe haven't been talked about in other spaces. So we want to provide a little bit of a different analysis, if you will, coming from the Latin American perspective, the third worldist perspective, even though we're all in the diaspora. Again, that's what we identify with at our core, and that's who we essentially advocate for and try to help and assist. Who wants to start it off? And if someone can synthesize a little bit, talking about the historical relationship between the two nations here, and then obviously leading up to, I guess, I mean, we can go a lot of different directions. I guess there are a lot of ties there, culturally, politically, socially. Especially specifically in the eastern region of Ukraine, where we had two breakaway regions, and that's what pretty much started off this whole situation. You had two breakaway regions declaring themselves to be independent states. Russia immediately recognized them as independent sovereign states, and you had Latin American nations such as Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua immediately also acknowledging them as independent sovereign states. And then you had a military incursion. But before we get into all that, I think it's good to sort of just touch a little bit on the historical relationship between the two countries. Talking, and then kind of fast forward it to I guess the end of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Fast forward to then the 2014 coup that took place in Ukraine. So if someone wants to set us up here for the rest of the conversation. Anyone? Nick, Natalia, and Miguel?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess it depends on where you want to start. I went back and I started reading some stuff from Lenin on Ukraine, and a lot of it's interesting. A lot of what he was talking about back during World War One, similar, kind of a similar topic, but I think in different circumstances, in a different context and environment. The question was whether or not Russia. This was before the Bolshevik Revolution, so the Russian Empire should go and invade Ukraine after it kind of declared independence, and as Russia was sort of collapsing at the end of World War One. And the liberal sort of capitalist in charge of Russia at the time, and the provincial government, their policy was to go in and invade Ukraine to sort of reclaim it for the Russian Empire. Lenin's take on it was that it was very clear in the Ukrainian message to the provincial government that they didn't want to secede from Russia. They saw Russia was an ally, and they just wanted more autonomy. And so Lenin's belief was that you cannot force change upon nations. You can't force nations to be socialist. You can't change a nation from the inside. You have to get the workers on your side, but it has to be voluntarily. And so Lenin's idea was, and he started to conceptualize this in his early letters, that if there is going to be a socialist state, that socialist state needs to have nations join it voluntarily through the workers. And I thought this was interesting. But the issue that I had with it was at a different time in a different context, right? This was a different Russia. I would say it was a slightly different Russia, but it was also facing different contexts in terms of foreign policy and what was going on in the world. Nowadays, what you have is, NATO aggression. Really, I think we can start. A lot of people should start, I think, talking about this at 2014. But I would even, you could even go further back to 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and really the breaking apart into separate republics of most of the Soviet Union. That was an intentional, Western imperialist tactic in order to, weaken the former Soviet economy, and which would now become the new Russian economy. So that's really where you could start this off with. It was constant Western aggression which pushed the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union, the creation of these republics, and their independence, which then leads to basically Western imperialists looking to create more markets in these republics, and some of these republics having Russia itself being one of the republics not wanting to open up to or not wanting to give itself completely to Western imperial interests, and so that's where I think that's where you can really draw the conflict. Where it started at, right? And you can go back to 2014 with the U.S.-backed coup, which was a right-wing coup, fascist coup, which essentially was the end of Ukrainian neutrality and the beginning of a Western invasion into Ukraine. I think a lot of people who point to Russian invasion don't point out that there was already an invasion back in 2014 when Ukraine was forced to end its neutrality. So I think there's a lot of history, like you said, Victor. It goes way back. I'm no expert. I can only tell you about what I've read, recently and in the past. But I think we should definitely start with 2014 and what's been going on since then. You could have just said you didn't like it. You didn't have to leave.
No, that was a mistake on mine. So does somebody want to pick up the ball from there, or does somebody want to add something from what Nick just stated? I actually want to, while whoever wants to pick it up from there, I also want to share something. Give me just a second here. But does somebody want to pick up from there? Pick it up from there, and then also maybe add a little bit to what he just said.
I think that when we are talking about this whole situation, I would like to quote something that Lord May, the first Secretary General of NATO, said, that their role was to keep Soviet Union out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. So when we are seeing this whole situation with Ukraine, and we know that they had a pact after the downfall of the Soviet Union of no expansion, and that they are disrespecting, we have to remember that their whole reason for existence was not solely to have an organization to counterbalance the Warsaw Pact, that they had a purpose of expansionism, that they have a purpose of seeking hegemony regarding not just the capitalism, but the power that the U.S. empire has from internationally speaking, geopolitical speaking. So I think when we are seeing the situation and this the coup in Ukraine in 2014, we have to remember the Euromaidan, that when it happened, people in the Western, that they put as a popular revolution of people wanting to westernize Ukraine. But it was in fact not just, of course, we know that they had neo-Nazis there, that it was something that was fomented by the US, by European countries. But we also have to remember that the most important thing was they had a revolution, a colorful revolution, if you want to use the geopolitical term, to simply say, oh, we are rejecting what Russia has offered to us. We are embracing the United States. They were not trying to free themselves like the rhetoric that we are seeing right now regarding everything that is happening with all Ukraine is choosing to embrace United States. Ukraine doesn't want to be partners with Russia anymore. They want to embrace United States. They want to embrace Europe, not just for white Western values, but because of the money, because of the capitalism, because of everything that they had promised Ukraine and they didn't deliver. And now they are paying a high price for their, I don't want to say choice, but I want to say misguided decision of having powerful allies that were using them as a pawn for agenda that has been around for so many years, and we are seeing and we are feeling as Latin Americans how powerful the NATO agenda is, how powerful the United States agenda is into dominating, into bashing, into submission everybody that rejects their sovereignty over us.
Absolutely, very good takes there. Very. So Nati, as you were talking there, I was highlighting some of the comments there, and again, part of the reason why we're doing this, and this has become a very polarizing issue for a lot of people, a lot of would-be progressives, and I someone privately messaged me one day saying, why do you use the term progressive? Well, it's widely used all over Latin America. It's not a pejorative. It's not a negative word. We shouldn't look at it as a bad term. Even revolutionaries use the term. It's used all over Latin America. So would-be progressives or would-be revolutionaries, people who even consider themselves Marxists, have gotten very emotional about this what's happening right now. And we needed to provide a very sober materialist analysis of the situation. We understand, and I see some of the comments, and even Anti-Conquista, I've read some of the comments on our Twitter feed and our Instagram, saying that we have horrible takes because Putin is again an evil monster who's trying to start World War III and all that. And these are very sloppy and very reactionary in all sense of the words takes. Russia, and I want to just share something else. Give me just a second here. Russia, we know, has essentially felt like it's been under siege and under attack for a long time by NATO forces. And so NATO, and this has been covered by a lot of other folks. Hey, Thomas, how you doing, brother? But by a lot of other folks who have said, look, Putin has had legitimate concerns about NATO continuing to expand, and there have been promises made about NATO not expanding, and they continue to expand, and they continue to get themselves involved. And then now Ukraine, has been there. If you go to the NATO's website and look to see what the position that they have there on Ukraine, and so Ukraine has been soliciting to become a member of NATO. And you have, there's so many different ways we can go about this, but the eastern region has been under attack for 8 straight years. And where's been the press? Where have been all these liberals and so-called progressives and so-called Marxists worrying about the eastern region of Russia? Of Ukraine. There's just a lot of really sloppy takes out there. A lot of people have been overreacting, have been having these very reactionary takes. Putin is the legitimate president of Russia. You know, we understand that Russia is not today is not the Soviet Union of yesterday. We understand that. We're not confused about that. But he is the legitimate president of Russia. He has had legitimate concerns, which he has voiced over and over and over. And you have NATO essentially knocking on Russia's doorstep via Ukraine. And Russia has said, Putin has said over and over that at some point there will be a reaction. And so, anyways, I'm going off a little bit on a tangent there, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. And by the way, I have here, Ben Norton's new website. And again, he's not the only one who's talked about this. A lot of other folks have talked about this. U.S. government knew NATO expansion to Ukraine would force Russia to intervene. And so he's in this piece. Former U.S. ambassador to Russia, William J. Burns, who is now CIA director, admitted in a classified 2008 embassy cable that NATO expansion to Ukraine crosses Moscow's security red lines and could potentially split the country in two, leading to violence or even some claim civil war, which would force Russia to decide whether to intervene. So this is from a cable going back to 2008, and somehow folks are confused about this. Again, it's very frustrating for folks to not look at the situation with a very sober, clear mind and try to piece these things together. And again, no one's here trying to defend, quote unquote, defend Putin or justify what Putin is doing, but we have to understand why he's doing what he's doing. There's a difference. And then there are other parts to it, which is, of course, people have said to me privately, Victor, you're very biased towards Putin. I said, absolutely, I am. 100%. He has become a great friend to Latin America. He's been part of this multipolar world that revolutionaries and progressives all over the world have talked about. So this idea that the United States is just going to dictate to the rest of the world, what's going to happen, whether it be via military, geopolitics, or economically, or what leaders it has to choose or can choose. Those days are over. The world is changing, and so I'll stop my rant there. But if someone could pick up from there or add to that. Go ahead, Nadia.
I just have something to add. I know this is not very geopolitical or the tone that we are trying to set here, but I understand why people are so emotional. First of all, they are being bombarded by the media as like the Ukrainians are like defenseless people, that they really don't know what to do, that they don't have an army. And we know that in fact they do not just have an army, but they have like several paramilitias that are very active for so many years. And secondly, why people are so invested, especially Westerns, it's because it's white people who are suffering now. Because you don't see this type of commotion when countries in the Middle Eastern countries, African countries, Latin American countries are being attacked. We don't see. We simply people simply ignore, because now the establishment, who is white, is feeling they are seeing themselves in the people who are like war refugees, who are like having their houses destroyed, their cities destroyed. And so this whole situation is also open a new debate regarding which lives matter. Some lives really matter more than others, because we have the situation with Palestine. When people say, well, Putin has nuclear weapons, so Israel. And why we are not talking about the fact that Israel also has nuclear weapons? So United States, who is always bombarding somewhere, the same day Putin started to attack Ukraine, the United States was attacking Somalia, and you couldn't find any material about it in the media.
Nothing.
So we are talking about racism being used as to frame a war narrative that we should care about this war. We should side with those people because they are white, because they want to be Western, even though like they are white, they are not quite like us, but they are almost like us. Like we are seeing now so many correspondents from the corporative media saying, well, they are almost like us. They are like Europeans and they are like white and they have blonde and blue eyes and they are like struggling. This is not normal. It's normal when we see people like throwing bombs on like brown people in the Middle Eastern, but not when they are doing against people like me. So we also have to start to bang on the fact that people are caring about Ukraine because they are white. And even so, we know that they have ethnic minorities there who are not white, and those people are being completely erased by the narrative. And many are not even, same as other people there, they're not even allowed to leave Ukraine, like the Roma people, Muslim ethnic minorities. They are all struggling in the middle of a war because the white counterparts, sorry, are not allowed them to leave. So can we also point out the fact that we are seeing the media openly saying that they are racist and that's why they care about Ukraine? And of course, we do have a Russian phobic narrative. We do have this whole narrative. I don't want to say narrative again, but I want to say like people are like throwing a propaganda against Russia through this war, and we are seeing elements from the Red Scare again of all Russian evil Russians that they are like destroying, killing babies or whatever. Like and all of this is being mixed up with the opinions of which supposed to be professional analysis of a military situation, of a diplomatic situation, and now they became like we have to save them because they are white. We don't like Russia because they are not Europeans, they are Russians, but we like Ukraine because Ukraine is European. So sorry for my rant. It's just like you're really bothering me a lot.
Nick, if you could cue up some of the other ones, I'm going to play this, and we found several of these. I mean, this is just
yeah, there's plenty of them.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. But so just to highlight what Natalia's talking about. I mean, I'm gonna play this.
I'm sorry, it's very emotional for me because I see European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed, children being killed every day with Putin's missiles and his helicopters and his rockets.
And so, of course, I understand and respect.
So, I mean, we found, Nick, I don't know if you have the other ones that we found. I mean, there's several of these where it's like, and look, and again, I want to get a little bit later on into the whole, you know, there's a lot of fake news out there about what the Russian military is and is not doing. That's a whole nother thing. Yes, there are casualties. Yes, this is look, let's be clear. Russia has invaded Ukraine. I don't know how, there's no other way to say that, right? And again, we can understand, we can give an explanation as to why this stuff is happening. And there are going to be casualties. The last number that I saw was, I believe it was less than 60 civilians from a source that I trusted. And there are a lot of real good reputable sources out there. Yeah, he's going to cue this up in just a second. There are a lot of other reputable sources out there that are saying Russia is clearly, well, first of all, the Ukraine military, there's just, you know, if we're doing a logistical analysis, it's no match for Russians. We all know that. The world knows that. Everybody knows that. Russia has been very, very methodical and very particular about, and I see Karen's comment, very particular about what it's striking to mitigate the chances of civilian loss, right? And that's not to say you're not going to have civilian loss, But I don't, this idea that Russia is bombing everything out there, and there's been a lot of fake news about with a lot of different images, not verified, and that's just not, it's just not true, and it drives me a little nutty because it's we're being sold yet more propaganda, by the Western press, by the Western imperialist press. This is no different than Iraq, no different than Libya. We can pick a number of situations when the West says we got to go get that bad guy, and we find out later on it's all bullshit, right? But anyways, Nick, go ahead and play that clip there.
But this isn't
You could hear
a
it.
place, with all due respect, like Iraq or Afghanistan, that has seen conflict raging for decades. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European, I have to choose those words carefully too, city where you wouldn't expect that or hope that it's going to happen.
It's really emotional for me because I see European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed, children being killed every day with Putin's missiles and his helicopters and his rockets.
Et on parle pas là de Syriens qui fuient des bombardements du régime syrien soutenu par Vladimir Poutine. On parle d'Européens qui partent dans leurs voitures qui ressemblent à nos voitures.
Now the unthinkable has happened to them. And this is not a developing third world nation. This is Europe.
On est au 21e siècle, on est dans une ville européenne et on a des tirs de missiles de croisière comme si on était en Irak ou en Afghanistan, vous imaginez?
That way the lady just says, "This is Europe," really gets me really angry, man.
No, and they have sometimes they even cry talking about the same day I was seeing some reporter crying saying that a child was born in a bomb shelter in Kiev. I was also I came across a video of a man in Palestine who has Down syndrome being beaten by Israeli soldiers. And there was not even a third of the commotion. And I don't want to play oppressive Olympics here, but what I'm trying to say is there's several narratives that they are being going through in the media of trying to make this, first of all, a Marvel movie, that we have a bad guy and we have a good guy, that Putin is a evil mastermind and Zelensky is some sort of a hero, a poor hero who has been standing by his people. We have a narrative, the anti-communist narrative that have been going through, of people saying, well, those are people who have been oppressed by the Soviets and now they are oppressed by their descendants, that they are the Russians. And we have the race narrative, and someone point out on the comments, well, when they were bombing Donbass in the past years, no one cared, even though they are blue-eyed blondes. But then you have, they have blue eyes, they might be blondes, but they are not Europeans, they are not Western, so no one will care. They are only caring by those people because they are white Europeans, or they want to be white Europeans. And the narrative framing on this, that Ukraine is being punished because they are trying to westernize their country, is what I'm seeing here, because I live in the UK. It's what I'm seeing from the British media, is what I'm seeing from other European medias. And just to finish my second rant here, I just want to say that we show the compilation from Redfish, and Redfish has been censored by the European Union, same as Russian Today and Sputnik. So what's up with liberal democracies thinking it's okay? They are saying that, well, this is a Putin machine propaganda, even though I've seen several correspondents and anchors from Russian Today and Sputnik being very critical of the Russian government regarding the arrest of anti-war protesters,
even Redfish was
the
being
cruelty
critical
of the refugee crisis. Anyway,
but they are being censored, and their material will be deleted from social media, and they will be and their assets will be froze in Europe, which means that even those who are working there will be without a salary. So we are having it. This is a war that it's being framed as a third world war, but because the West wants to, that this is they are trying to create a new war. This is not coming from Russia. They are trying to create a situation that all the world has to choose a side, and we are not talking about sides. We have to talk about just the victims of what it's about to happen, or what is already happening, who are the working class who are suffering, the people who are being affected in both sides, the anti-war protesters, and the winners who is profiting of this: the war industry, oil magnates, the same people who have been profiting over all the horrible things we have been facing in the modern world. So I feel that when we don't analyze all of the aspects of this conflict, which is the first big international conflict that we are living through, the social media age, and we ignore how the media is working towards the vilification of the Russians, it's not professional. This is not journalism. This is propaganda, and we are seeing a lot of propaganda nowadays.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, and I want to talk about a little bit about that propaganda. Like, even myself, I remember the Iraq War when I was in high school. I remember that propaganda. It's the same tactics that the media uses, seeing the same thing, the way to describe Putin and the way to describe, Saddam Hussein back then. And then, obviously those two people are not, they weren't communists, but it's just the narrative they paint them. It's like Natalia was saying, it's like a Marvel movie. This big evil monster versus the heroic, Americans and their allies. And then the way they're painting Zelensky, as she was saying, I think strategically he's savvy with social media, right? Because of his age. So he's using social media for his advantage, because he's out there tweeting videos. Oh, we're down here on the ground with the people, me and like all his cabinet people, his people from his president administration. So I think that's also interesting to see with him, because the age he is, he knows how to use social media to his advantage. But even with the propaganda, as Natalia was talking about, with these, a lot of trolling from right-wing trolls and people just creating this narrative. I know I saw a tweet that this, on Telegram, there was Africans that live in Ukraine, they're using Telegram to communicate. And we have Black propagandists that are Americans that a Black Agenda report has talked about before. This one guy named Terrell Jermaine Starr.
Yeah.
He works for the Atlantic. He's like a fellow for the Atlantic Council, which is like the media arm of Nato.
Right.
But I guess he was tweeting about this Telegram and pretty much saying, "Oh, it's a Russian ops." It's like, it's so all these trolls started spamming the Telegram when it was actually just actual Africans from Ukraine trying to communicate so they could get out of the country. So even this person, who's a Black man, is, being propped up and used for the Western narrative, and he's actually harming Africans here by, because he has a big platform. They started spamming it. And then the other thing, when it comes to the sanctions, the reason we're here talking about, we want to talk how this perspective, how it's impacting Latin America. If these sanctions are going to impact Latin American countries. Russia provided the vaccine to Latin American countries. They do trade. So these sanctions are going to impact our people too. But, I see a lot of people not, that might be Latino, but are misinformed, are not thinking about that, how it's going to impact our people because we trade with a country like Russia. There's sanctions on trade, there's sanctions, it's going to impact us. But it's crazy how the propaganda is just working right now?
Also regarding how Ukraine is using social media to communicate, or Zelensky trying to be like a cool guy on Twitter, whatever. It was funny because when a few moments before or a few moments after, I saw that the official Ukrainian government account on Twitter, they were like posting a meme of Vladimir Putin as Hitler or something. And they have been using social media in a very strange way. But the most problematic, I think, is that they were asking for donations for his army through cryptocurrency. And I was thinking, can you imagine if the Russian government did the same? Like, can you please donate to our army using cryptocurrencies? And you would see a whole debate of like the Western, should we be using cryptocurrencies, or the evil doings of cryptocurrencies? But when it's Ukraine doing, it's fine, it's great. And now many people who donated, and I personally know a few who did, are feeling a bit icky because today the National Guard of Ukraine posted a video of them dipping bullets into pig's fat because they are fighting against Chechen armies, and Chechens are Muslims, so Muslim is forbidden by pork is forbidden by Muslims. And now we are seeing all of basically a 24-hour coverage of on social media, but only from Ukrainian side. I saw a Russian website complaining about the Brazilian media, especially a journalist who was incorrectly saying that a Russian tank had run over a car or something like that. And the journalist knew that that tank was an Ukrainian tank, but he chose to say it was a Russian tank because he said, oh, I don't want to make the Ukrainians look bad. And he said so on his social media. Like they have, especially the Western correspondents, the international correspondent, because you keep a correspondent in Europe or into a war zone costs a lot of money. So only corporative media has access to this type of money. They're like choosing how they are using the footages of what is going on. They are choosing how to portray the situation on social media. And of course, we have our useful idiots, but we are living in an age of like politicians and political digital influencers who are also using the same images to frame a narrative that is actually going towards what I said about like a Marvel movie situation. That is, oh my God, they are like supporting, they are like resisting the oppression of a mastermind of crime or like a supervillain or whatever. And the same way we are seeing the Western media showing, look how cute, like a Ukrainian MP is holding a rifle, or she's holding a machine gun, or people are in the streets together doing petrol bombs. Like, can you imagine if we had a Latina politician holding a machine gun? What they would say? Oh, Dilma Rousseff, the president of Brazil, my homeland, she was shredded to shreds when she told, because of her past in the guerrilla in Brazil, the same as we had other politicians who are nowadays in politics who had a past in armed struggle. Or can you imagine how...
Natalia, if I could just stop right there, because this is very important. So Dilma Rousseff, who succeeded Lula, right? She was the heir apparent to Lula. For folks who don't know, not only was she, in terms of professionally, a trained economist, okay, she was a Marxist guerrilla fighter under I believe in the 50s, right? Was it the 50s?
60s.
The 60s. Okay, in the 60s. So a lot of people don't know that about her, and she was the president of Brazil for a short, brief period, and then there was a coup that took place where the oligarchs essentially just took her out, right? And Natalia, you and I had a conversation recently about this. How again in Brazil, the oligarchs in Brazil, the capitalist ruling class in Brazil, they have not been able to figure out Lula at the polls. They can't defeat Lula or the Workers' Party at the polls. So what they have done is turn over to something called lawfare, and obviously the el golpe que le dieron a Dilma, the coup that they did on. But Dilma was she's a gangster, right? She was a Marxist guerrilla. So that's what Natalia was speaking to. But continue, Natalia.
And it's very interesting because I was watching before we start here a video of Dilma explaining the situation in Ukraine and the colorful revolution the Euromaidan, how you want to call the westernization of Ukraine in 2014, started at the same time that the coup in Brazil, the same popular movements that they started in Brazil with the same rhetoric that the people is rising against the government. And in the end, who were the people who are part of both movements in Ukraine, in Brazil? Far right and people who were in the back pocket of the US government, NSA or CIA, whatever. But the same people who were like who had orchestrated the coup in Brazil were the people who had orchestrated the coup in Ukraine. And like Miguel was talking about Atlantic Council, if you check their timeline of articles, and I did so because at Brazil Wire we have been covering about like Atlantic Council work in Latin America for many years. You can see that time they were dividing their attentions between Ukraine and Brazil, like putting the situation in both countries, not as a coup or as a internationally financed golpista movement, but as a popular uprising. All the people is talking that they cannot accept, and the arguments were very similar: corruption and connections with crime. And then you have and in Brazil it was like all Dilma is too connected with like socialist movements in Latin America. She's a friend of Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, at the time Bolivia, Evo Morales. And in Ukraine it was, the president is very connected to Russia, so he's dangerous. So it's no coincidence when we see those jokers from the United States fomenting coups in countries who have a local or regional strategic importance, like Brazil and Ukraine. Why? Brazil is very different from Ukraine. We know it's the biggest country in South America and it's very rich with lots of things, but Ukraine can really bother Russia. So for them, it's also something that is really valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would add to that just the part of what the U.S. policy is and what the U.S. goal is to create, like you're basically saying, is regional instability. What does a Ukraine which is unstable, that's having to deal with, fascist, or having to deal with basically what is a civil war, that allows for a crisis on Russia's border. It allows for the U.S. to get weapons, extremist supplies, all kinds of problems that lie right on Russia's border that I think extend beyond just a U.S. military base. it's kind of, we saw the same thing, I think, with the Armenian and Azerbaijan conflict earlier last year, I think, or 2 years ago. I forget when exactly that was. But basically, the idea was, we create instability next to countries in order to destabilize the entire region, right? You don't have to necessarily go after Venezuela if you can get Colombia or Brazil to harbor those paramilitaries, which then go into Venezuela, right? Or you can get Colombia to host a humanitarian aid convoy, which is going to go into Venezuela, right? It's destabilization of regions, which then affect countries that they want to target.
Also, Nick, it's important to highlight that Colombia is the only global partner of NATO in Latin America. And they have extended the invitation to Brazil when Trump was the president, which is something that I know Lula, if crossing my fingers here, is our next president again, he will never go through. But a week before the conflicts start in Ukraine, Ivan Duque had a meeting with NATO, and he highlighted, both him and the NATO director, that they were concerned that the Russians were planting their own agents between the Venezuelan and the Colombian border to destabilize the region. So we have the same narrative being also starting to be framed in Colombia, which of course it was debunked by Venezuela, who just said, well, you are happy to be just like a NATO's puppy dog, and that's your choice, but we don't need Russian soldiers here. Our own soldiers are really great.
Right.
So I was sharing before, I didn't get to it, but let me see if I can go back to it. Give me just a second here. So another angle again that we wanted to bring up, which again you don't really hear a lot of people talk about this anywhere, and this is important to us, right? Because here at Anticonquista, this is what we focus. We focus on Latin America, right? So give me just a second here so I can pull this up. Let's see here. Well, here's one. This is by Orinoco Tribune, which I've been shouting them out every chance I get because I think they're doing excellent work. But here's White House, Venezuela will feel the pressure of sanctions against Russia, right? And then here's the video that I had before. We'll just play it.
Lo que se tiene que tomar aquí muy en cuenta es que las sanciones sobre Rusia son tan robustas que tendrán impacto sobre aquellos gobiernos que tienen afiliaciones económicas con Rusia, y eso es por diseño. O sea que Venezuela va a comenzar a sentir esa presión, Nicaragua va a sentir esa presión, al igual que Cuba, pero al fin lo que nosotros queremos son salidas negociadas a la crisis en Venezuela, queremos una restauración al orden diplomático en Nicaragua y queremos que los cubanos sean los que determinen su futuro y no estén en una dictadura, que es lo que estaban por más de 60 años.
Mencionaba al principio que esto va a impactar, estas sanciones de Estados Unidos a Rusia impactarán a gobiernos como el de Venezuela. Específicamente, ¿cómo?
Bueno, si uno ve las sanciones sobre 13 instituciones financieras entre las más grandes en Rusia, eso tendrá un impacto con cualquier gobierno o negocio que tenga comercio con estas instituciones, pero también mucho de este lavado de dinero y gobiernos que operan fuera del sistema financiero internacional sentirán el apretón en base a estas sanciones.
Notice how he had the headline on this, and this is Orinoco Tribune posting in their piece something from Kausachung News, which is another great outlet, and the title reads, Biden advisor, U.S. sanctions against Russia are designed to impact Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. Designed, right? So while everyone is focusing on Russia and Ukraine right now, Washington is also siempre con su maniobra, right? With these maneuvers, they're still thinking about Latin America, and specifically Venezuela, specifically Cuba, specifically Nicaragua, right? And then he asked him a specific question, and he didn't hesitate. So he said, so how will this impact these countries? And he had he was already ready to go, right? Talking about the international financial systems and how making reference to the fact that countries like Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua, which are heavily sanctioned. Again, these are unilateral, illegal sanctions. I'm not an international law expert, but most law experts agree that these are illegal, unilateral sanctions. That they have to, of course, they have to skirt the system because they're not allowed to participate in the system simply because the United States says so, right? So, so when people like us have to come over here and sort of defend Putin, there's again, this is it's multi-layered, it's very nuanced. There's a lot of different things happening, a lot of moving parts happening at the same time. And again, it's just a lot of sloppy reporting. Like Natalia said, it's not professional. It's not, and what you're getting is propaganda. And it's just, again, it's maddening because if for the average person out there who doesn't understand this stuff, you're getting your news from the Western press, and it's our job to go out there in this battle of ideas and try to provide this type of analysis. What's really even more maddening is that people that you would consider allies in this geopolitical chess game, if you will, that you would normally consider allies, are also saying the same thing that the Western media is selling, right? That the United States is selling. It's unbelievable, and it's just not it's not a very materialist analysis. It's very sloppy. It's very reactionary, and it's a very emotional response to something that's a crisis that's legitimate, that's happening right now, and that would have ramifications worldwide. And again, it's important that this is why we're doing this segment.
And I think too, just to add to that, like a lot of folks, for me, I expect there to be propaganda on both sides. I expect, obviously on the Russian side, they're going to cover the side from the Russian military side. And on our side, they're going to cover the side from the Ukrainian military side, or at least on the Ukrainian side, that's what they're going to do. But then you have to start asking questions. Well, then why is Western media, why is the US media, why is the UK media, why is the EU media only showing perspective from the Ukrainian media side, never any perspectives from the Russian media side? Even before this war broke out, there was propaganda. I mean, again, propaganda can date back to 2014, but I'm talking just right before the war broke out. You saw propaganda of, at least here in the U.S., there was pictures of this grandma or this elderly woman with a rifle who was being trained by, Ukrainian volunteers to defend her homeland. And it turned out that was just being organized by the Azov battalion. And then you had constantly things built on top of that. There was, I think, one that was like the Ghost of Kiev, which was essentially like this supposedly Ukrainian soldier who was shooting down all of these Russian planes. All of that ended up being fake. There was the idea that this Ukrainian residential apartment was hit by a Russian missile. Turned out that was not true either. It turned out to be a Ukrainian missile. That was reported in Spanish news, right? And so, all of the U.S. Western media and a lot of the media outlets have just been spouting, like we said, clearly things that are just clearly false, clearly untrue. And I think to some extent that's to be expected. But at the same time, I think that if they want to claim to be objective, if they want to claim to be fair, or claim to be equal, or telling both sides, they should just drop that line and they should just be honest. They should be honest. We're reporting this from the side of Ukraine, and this is our this is our bias, right? Because that's the only perspective they're going to give, right? And we should expect that that's the only perspective they're going to have, is from the Ukrainian perspective, because they don't care about the Russian side. I mean, and we see that they don't care about the Russian side. To them, the Russians are like Natalia was saying, and like we've been sharing in our group chat. They're painting the Russians and Putin as the next Nazi Germany. That's and that's insanity. It's insanity to us, but I guess it also makes sense because here in the West, especially in the United States, we're taught that Nazi Germany is the worst, absolutely worst thing that has ever happened in the history of the world. We're taught that, you know, Hitler, that was the worst guy ever, worse than slavery, worse than colonialism was Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. And so anytime that the US media wants to paint something or someone as bad, they're going to go straight to that example of World War II. Anytime the US population wants to paint something as bad, they're going to go straight to, well, you know, what is this, Nazi Germany? And so, you know, we're seeing that exact same kind of connections and that those analogies being made today because of, like we've been talking about, just the propaganda on the West. And it is, I think the most important thing is to point out how many progressives and social democrats who are on the one hand like anti-war fall right into line with a lot of this media propaganda, right? Especially the US media propaganda are you know, repeating those same lies about Russia invading, Putin, you know, being some sort of evil dictator, authoritarian dictator. You know, I'm not under any misconception that Putin is some sort of socialist. I know he's not a socialist. He's very clear about that. But at the same time, he's not. And you have to understand imperialism. Russia is not the primary imperialist nation in the world right now. Russia's imperialism is not even negligible to EU, to European imperialism. The Scandinavian countries, in my opinion, are more imperialist than Russia right now, right? I mean, there are so many bigger issues that we can be talking about. We hardly even talk about Canadian mining operations that are affecting Latin America right now, far more than any Russian operation is, or even any Russian operation is planning to be in the near future. But that's, you know, none of that gets talked about because we kind of buy into this sort of Western media narrative that, you know, China, Russia, these are the enemies, and these guys have the potential to be just as bad maybe as what the Europeans are, as Europeans are right now, as what the Europeans are doing in France right now or in Latin America, right? So, or I'm sorry, not in Africa right now, what France is doing in Africa right now. So this is the kind of stuff, you know, I think a lot of it is partially a distraction, partially to like again, like we've mentioned, propaganda in order to take us away from real issues that are being caused by the US and the EU.
But actually, like we have like literal examples of colonialism that are happening right now in Latin America, not just like all Canadians. Yes, what you said is very important, especially because they have been lobbying people within Bolsonaro government in Brazil for changing laws in order to have access to mining rights within indigenous lands in Brazil. But also, where's the international mobilization for the people of Puerto Rico or the people of Las Malvinas who have been victim? The Argentinians have been like fighting viciously to have their land back, and the United Kingdom refused it, and they have colonized those islands in a way that no one who is from Argentina has even the right to visit those islands. So we don't see the same indignation when we are talking about colonization in Latin America. And I'm not just even talking, and of course we can expand for the puppet governments that we had nowadays, like Bolsonaro being a puppet from the United States, Ivan Duque, and so many others that we know that they are only there because the empire wants them to have power in order for them to explore Latin America. But when the issue that I'm seeing right now, and I want to go back a little bit for what Victor said about like sanctions for affecting Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, is that we are seeing that the United States has been trying to destabilize, and I'm not going to talk about Cuba, of course, for like 60 years or so, but they have been escalating their aggressions against the Cuban government. We saw what has happened last year with their attempts of a colorful revolution in Cuba, but also in Nicaragua and Venezuela. They have been increasingly frustrated for the fact that they have been trying to overthrow those governments, and the people from those countries are not on board with what the United States wants. So they are now they will use, and they are already doing, because I saw a Spanish newspaper making a horrible graphic showing which country is supporting who in the war. Like it was like a football match or something. And they had a column like Russia, and you have like Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, China. Like it was like the evil axis all over again. And they will use the opportunity of an international conflict to be able to have a proper excuse for a bigger intervention in those countries. It's my view that this is not going just for when we are talking about like sanctions. I think that they will use the opportunity to be able to escalate their aggressions against our hermanos from Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua.
Absolutely. And so, you know, sometimes I always tell folks, you know, I don't take my cues from Western communists, specifically, with all due respect, a lot of white communists. I look towards Latin America. I look to see what are they saying, right? And so here we have Bruno Rodriguez. Although you know what? Let me back up, and I gotta say this. It has been interesting because I have been paying attention to, you know, in the midst of this whole thing over the last couple of years, this debate that we've been having, I guess, if you want to call it, between the patriotic socialists and third worldists and whatnot, and whether or not, you know, patriotic socialism is a legitimate tactic. I mean, we discard it. We don't get involved with that. I gotta say, I did find it interesting that a lot of the folks that I would normally disagree with on a lot of different other issues have been better on this particular issue than a lot of other folks that I would normally side with. It's just been weird. This whole thing has just been very bizarre. And so I gotta admit that. But anyways, let's go back to Cuba. Here's Bruno Rodriguez. He tweeted out, you know, he's a government official in Cuba. The U.S. determined, and by the way, I try to click on this, and look what happens when I click on it. I don't know if you guys can see that. Oh no, you can't see it. Anyways, when I try to click on this link that he provided, it's no longer available. So I don't know if that's if there's something going on with again them being censored, or there's just having a technical issue. But anyway, so he tweeted. I'm going to read this because I think this is important. Bruno Rodriguez, again, government official in Cuba, said that the U.S. determination to continue NATO's progressive expansion towards the Russian Federation borders has brought about a scenario with implications of unpredictable scope, which could have been avoided. And then he provides a link, Declaración de Gobierno Revolucionario de Cuba. And again, if you click on the link, it's not working right now. So I don't know what's going on with that. I just try to click on it, but it's not working. If you just give me a second, I want to be able to. All right, so here's the second part to this. Rigorous and honest assessment of the situation in Ukraine, not possible if just claims of Russia to US and NATO and factors leading to the use of force and non-observance of legal principles and international norms fully subscribed and endorsed by Cuba are not carefully assessed. Here's the third part to this. Cuba champions the international law and is committed to the Charter of the United Nations. Cuba will always defend peace and oppose the use of threats to use force against any state. We deeply regret the loss of innocent lives, civilian lives in Ukraine. And here's number 4, the fourth part to this piece. Ignoring for decades Russia's well-founded claims of security guarantees and assuming it would remain defenseless in the face of a direct threat to its national security was a mistake. Russia has the right to defend itself. Peace can't be achieved by sieging or cornering states. And here's the fifth and final piece to this. We call for a serious, constructive, and realistic diplomatic solution to the current crisis in Europe by peaceful means, ensuring the security and sovereignty of all, and regional and international peace, stability, and security. If you see some of the statements made, you know, by other revolutionary governments, very similar. China, which is very China's very calculated. Like they're very calculated and very measured in what they have like a similar sentiment. They're just like, let's we need to figure this out, right? Like we need to get everybody to the table. We need to figure this out. And there is a solution to this. I mean, it's not, Putin wants to know that that Ukraine is not going to join NATO. He needs reassurance about that, right? Those two breakaway regions, Donetsk and Luhansk, at this point, he wants them to be recognized as sovereign states. And he wants to make sure that they're not going to be under siege again, like they were in the last 8 years, where 14,000 folks have lost their lives over there, right? And by the way, something we haven't talked about, and I want to talk a little bit about, is Nick, you talked about Putin in the comparison to Hitler. I need to talk about that, and I want to hear everybody else's thoughts. But he wants that as well, and he needs certain reassurances from the West with regards to NATO. So, I mean, all of this can literally just this can be ended tonight. And my understanding, the latest that I saw, and if anybody has any updates, because we're live right now, it looks like there are talks and negotiations for a ceasefire. That's something that I read. And if you notice, there's not much activity happening right now, right? If you go to Twitter right now, not much is happening right now. And there's another thing I want to add, by the way, very quickly. So that's what Putin essentially wants, right? So we know what he wants, right? We know what he wants, and the West is saying, nope, we're going to arm Ukraine, right? Biden just authorized $350 million and is asking for $6 billion from Congress to arm Ukraine. Ukraine cannot defeat the Russia. They can't win. They're not going to be able to defeat. Everybody knows this. So that's a futile experiment. Why would you do that? And this idea of sanctioning everybody, where we're just going to sanction everybody. We're going to sanction Venezuela. We're going to sanction Cuba. We're going to sanction Nicaragua. All the bad actors, all the evil guys, all the bad guys, we're just going to sanction everybody, which is an act of war. Sanctioning is another country's an act unilateral. It's an act of war. So it's this very illogical response. And the way I interpret it too is like the U.S. is I think they're just scared at this point. The world is changing so much. They're almost scared and desperate, and they're using their propaganda machine. They're throwing money at it and their propaganda machine. But notice that the Biden will make a commitment to a lot of other things. Like he ain't saying like we're gonna show up there. He's not. So it's like they're scared and they don't know what to do. So they're just throwing money at it and throwing the propaganda machine and trying to beat people over the head, the whole world over the head. Over like, oh, Putin's this bad guy. He's the next Hitler. About that point about Hitler, the irony of this, and I put up that piece on the Washington, if folks Google how many Soviets died in World War II, right? Here's the irony of all this. More communists, more Soviets died helping defeat Nazi Germany, helping defeat fascism, and then any other demographic. That's a fact. 24 to 26 million Soviets died trying to get rid of Hitler, right? And here, another irony of this is that within the state of Ukraine, the sovereign state of Ukraine, you have neo-Nazis in high-ranking capacity in the government and in the military, and there are neo-Nazi militias that get full support and get full reign to do whatever the fuck they want to those ethnic Russian groups in the eastern region of Ukraine. Now those two breakaway regions, Donetsk and Luhansk. And this is another thing that just drives me crazy, is when people are comparing Putin to Hitler. Like, what are we talking about? Do we know what Hitler did? Like, we understood what he did, right? We understand what happened there, why the world fought against, like, you had the US allying with the Soviets to get rid of Hitler, and what Hitler did to, do we really, okay, we know what he did, and we now know how many Soviets died in the fight against Nazi Germany. And to turn this around and call Putin Hitler, it's just again, they're creating this alternative universe, these conglomerates, right? These multinational monopolies, in terms of the media coverage, and they're calling Putin the next. They're comparing him to Hitler. it's just the ironies on this is just it drives me crazy. Anyways, I'll wait for that. I'll get off my soapbox and I'll wait for someone's response on that, on all that.
I wanted to highlight one of the comments because I think it ties into what you were saying. It's pretty funny that the U.S. Esquerdista, USA will fight until the last Ukrainian. And I think that it's interesting because that's really what you're mentioning, Victor, is like basically what the U.S. and this is I think what we've seen. I'm not sure if y'all have seen the videos where Ukraine is showing pictures of them opening up this cache of weapons and just distributing it to civilians. In my mind, what we're witnessing is, okay, the U.S. strategy is let's turn this into Syria, or let's turn this into something worse than Syria. Let's just make it complete chaos. Let's just give everyone weapons. You know what? And you know what? Russia's going to go in there. They're not going to know who's an enemy, who's a civilian, who's an ally. And now they're going to be confused. They're going to be getting shot from everyone because it's going to be like, the U.S. in Afghanistan. It's going to be like the U.S. in Iraq. And that's really what they're trying to do. And it's kind of gross because at the same time as the U.S. actions, and that's what the U.S. policy is, the propaganda machine is saying, oh, no, we care about the human. We're like, what about the human cost in Ukraine? We care about human lives in Ukraine, right? I mean, we care more about human lives in Ukraine than Russia does. In the meantime, we're literally trying to cause chaos in the country. We're trying to cause civilians to kill each other. There've already been reports that after they've given weapons to civilians have killed each other. There's been reports that, and I followed some of the groups on Telegram. One of the groups on Telegram talking about how there's been basically Nazi volunteer civilians who are forcing at gunpoint other Ukrainian civilians to join the military. Usually men, aged 18 to 30. So, and this is basically what the U.S. This is the U.S. goal, right? This is what the U.S. wants to do. It wants to create that chaos because it knows that it'll destabilize Russia, and it knows it'll cause Russia to be in this country for however many years it may need to in order to try to fix the region. That's really the point. I think that's the goal. It's to leech off and destroy the Russian economy through an insurmountable war, similar to what happened to the United States.
And like you were saying, how they're getting volunteers from the citizens in Ukraine and kind of forcing them. I think Zelensky announced earlier, like pretty much calling for international volunteers to come join them in the fight.
To do what? To do what? To die?
It's crazy. So he's already calling out. He's inviting. He's pretty much throwing an open invitation to fascists here.
Let me
come join their fight.
Two things I would like to talk about
there.
this. As one, the Azov battalion have been recruiting in Brazil since 2018, which is something that have been reported even at the time, look the irony, at the time by the Israeli media, because the Azov battalion is openly anti-Semitic. So we are talking about like people who really don't like Jewish. And now we know that those people from Azov battalion, they have been creating links with several far-right movements, including in Latin America, especially in Brazil, because it's the biggest country in the world who has a far-right president at the present time. And we know that they are not just recruiting from abroad. We are seeing governments, the UK government said that if their citizens wanted to go and fight for Ukraine, they would have helped to do so. And this took me back to 2016 when President Obama refused it when signing the Consolidated Appropriation Act to include Azov battalion on the exclusion of CIA funding. So the United States, the UK, they all have been financing a movement who has been recruiting from far-right organizations all over for at least since 2014, that when they were praised by even like the lib progressive of The Guardian as like freedom fighters or something. We have we are seeing empowering from the Azov battalion by the media again, which was something that it was unthinkable even for the discussing corporative media standards 2 years ago, because they were there is that interview from their commander saying that they are aware that at least 70% of their soldiers are openly neo-Nazis, but they were not all Nazis there. They just hated a few minorities, but they were not like full-blown Nazis. But and now we have like governments cheering, funding, and like and why do you think that Ukraine is receiving cryptocurrency? If you know a little bit about how the deep web works, who charges in cryptocurrency? Mercenaries. So these are the type of people we are talking about. We're talking like extremely, we know all wars are dirty, but we are talking about like they are going like really, really dirty on this. And they will be portrayed by the media as freedom fighters, as we saw. And I'm seeing some people talk to me about it, saying, "Well, we might be witnessing the birth of the new Taliban," which was very similar to what we saw, like the United States enabling something to a group of like extremists to fight against communists, and they became international terrorist group. And now we are seeing the same with Azov battalion. And no one is questioning why is it when Putin is compared to Hitler, no one sees that Putin is saying, even though like I don't agree with the majority things he says, that he doesn't accept a government who has Nazis on their ministries, on their high rank positions. And Putin has been very clear about it. He said, I'm not going to, I don't want Ukraine to be a colony of Russia. He invited the Ukraine army to overthrow Zelensky government, saying, you deserve better. You deserve a government that is not ruled by drug addicts and Nazis. And some people from the Western media has been saying, wow, this is absurd because Zelensky, it's Jewish and his grandparents died on the Holocaust or something. But we know how politics play, and it's not hard. Well, Trump's son-in-law is Jewish. His daughter is Jewish.
Hitler was Jewish.
He was, yeah, so it does not make him someone that is not friends with neo-Nazis. And no one has a critical view. You're not seeing the media criticizing or even like deleting their previous opinions regarding the Azov battalion and the openly neo-Nazi views on like everything.
Nati, is it fair to say that in Brazil you're seeing? I mean, Bolsonaro is far right. I mean, he made openly made statements about like the yesteryear of the dictatorship of the 50s, and he's nostalgic about it. He was considered by many as like the baby Trump of Latin America. And so, is it fair to say that you're seeing a rise in like a fascist ideology, in Brazil, like a growing sentiment of people moving more towards or is that fair to say?
Yeah, according researchers that are monitoring the work of far right in Brazil, Brazil has the fastest growing number of far right groups popping up in the country. So we have cells from Azov battalion, your regular neo-Nazis. Even the KKK is in Brazil now. So they have been, of course, empowered by Bolsonaro's election, but we have to remember that those people, they work in they connect in an international way. So the money for them, it's not coming from Brazil. This money is coming from abroad. Recently, neo-Nazi YouTuber who was who fled Germany and went to Brazil. He went to the southern of the country, which is majority white, and there has many European descendants, mostly German and Italians. And he was living in a majority German city in Brazil. And he was helping other neo-Nazis to delete, to erase, to clean up graffitis and remove posters who were like Antifa or saying like Nazi lives don't matter. And he was like helping them there. And why do you think he went there? Because he had connections there. So the way those people work with those interconnectivity is also making a huge impact on what's going on now, because people are the far right is a bit confused by the situation in Russia, because you have the media saying to them, Putin is bad, Putin is the new Hitler, Putin is promoting genocide, which we know is something that they love. And by the other hand, we have our pals from like Azov Battalion who are like fighting for freedom, for I saw even propaganda saying Zelensky was great for LGBTQ plus rights. And I was like, okay, so now you are saying that Ukraine is a paragon for like progressive politics, identity politics. But the media is trying to say it is. And those people are confused as fuck. Right. They're like, I don't know who I should support now. So in Brazil, the far right groups, people who are monitoring those groups, they say, well, they are very, very much confused because Bolsonaro is trying to avoid voicing himself an opinion on the matter, because he has elections coming in and he doesn't want to be on no one bad side, United States and Russia. So Bolsonaro is trying to keep himself out of the situation, which by his standards is a very sensitive decision, because you see, if you say anything that is not remotely, I support, I love Ukraine, you will be attacked like Cuba is being, like Argentina, who's also being for saying that they don't want to, they will not sign sanctions against Russia. And Bolsonaro even he even had a fit when his vice president was criticizing Putin, saying this is not his job to do. And even though Brazil voted for the sanctions that have been the resolutions for sanctioning Russia in the UN Security Council, which was something that they had a very long, lame excuse for doing so. But it was soon after that Brazil received a phone call from Antony Blinken. So the US is pressuring Brazil to go against Russia publicly. We are seeing that Bolsonaro is trying to stay away. So the far right in Brazil, who's always looking up to him to make their decisions or to have a stance on any views for that matter, they don't know what to do, because Bolsonaro is at the beach today, actually. So he really is not into talk about the situation. And I think that when we are talking about how we are seeing the ways things are happening right now, I'm seeing many people who are clearly unfit for military combat, saying that they are enlist themselves to go to Ukraine. That if those people end up in Ukraine, of course they will die, but they will see that and those who survive, that they will see who are the people who they are willing to risk their life for it. That they are not nice people at all. That they are really full-blown Nazis.
I wanted to touch on one of the things you mentioned about like the whole trying to use like LGBTQ and all these sort of identity politics to paint Ukraine as like a progressive. It reminds me exactly of what they did in Israel, right? In Israel, you have this whole term of pink washing, or trying to basically show that, oh, look, the IDF is filled with women fighters. It's filled with LGBTQ fighters. It's filled with with Christians, with Arabs, with, you know, all kinds of people. It's a progressive military that's, you know, progressively occupying and killing Palestinians and beating them over the head with, you know, it's somehow they're trying to use this sort of notion that, oh, well, because it's progressive, we need to go out there and support it, and it means it's a good thing.
They are also vegan.
Yeah, and they're vegan and vegetarian and like all this stuff. Like, who cares about who they are if what they're doing is oppressing and killing people who, you know, are just trying to live on their land? It's ridiculous to think that, you know, people will actually fall for it. And, you know, Miguel kind of talked about this too earlier with the guy, Jermaine, who, you know, is a black guy who was in Ukraine, works for the Atlantic Council, and I've been following some of his stuff too, and all of it is just like,
and everything.
Yeah, he does all this stuff, and he's really good at just painting this picture. Oh, well, you know, as a black guy in Ukraine, you know, the government loves me. He had this article that was like, the headline was, "I was arrested in Ukraine for being black," and something like, I'm happy about that, or like I'm content about that. I'm okay with that.
He's weird.
It's like, you know, the mind, the gymnastics, the mental gymnastics you have to do in order to sort of justify your own oppression and look past people's actions, I think is one of the most dangerous things, especially for our people, for people of color, that we really suffer from, this sort of, you know, self-hatred almost, where we have to sort of appeal to European or to white standards. And it really comes out to play here, you know, with everything that's going on now. I see people, you know, mentioning in the comments the students, Nigerian students, and, you know, and we've kind of talked about that as well. And Natalia brought that up, the Ecuadorian students, and we have those videos. Jamaican students, I saw some of the ones early on who are being denied from even leaving the country because, you know, like we were talking about earlier, this is an issue that many people are seeing as a European issue, as a white issue. You know, anyone who's, you know, whenever this happens to any country that's not white, that's not European, it's not, you know, it's not privileged. Those lives don't matter. And I think, you know, the key here is that Ukraine is one of the things that have stood out in a lot of propaganda is Ukraine is relatively European, right? So the issue isn't even that they're necessarily fully white. It's that they want to be adopted into the European culture. They want to be adopted into Western Europe. And so, you know, that gives them a little bit more of a leg up than the Iraqis, who never wanted to be adopted into Western Europe, or who never even stood a chance of being adopted into Western European culture. You know, and that's, you know, this kind of stuff it's pretty clear that this is not only an imperialist war, but it also has a very serious racial aspect that's being pushed by NATO and the West, that's demonstrating that these people in Ukraine are you know, are neo-Nazis, are racist. They don't care about, you know, human life. They only care about the whatever imperialist ambitions that they have that they're being paid for. I would even venture to say they don't even care about Ukrainian life. You know, what some of Zelensky's actions that are most astounding to me that come out in the propaganda are when he was hiding in Kiev. His images of him being in Kiev, you know, trying to, and the Western media painting it as some sort of heroism while he's out in the streets defending Kiev. I don't see that as heroism. That's cowardice, because Russia is saying, Putin is saying, we want Zelensky. We want to topple his government. And so what does Zelensky do? well, I'm hiding out in the masses of civilian of the 3 million population is the population of Kiev. I'm hiding out amongst the masses.
He has his own security. There's gonna be body shields, to
right,
protect.
and he's using his own population as a shield. He's saying to the Russians, come and get me in Kiev, in a densely populated city. Come and get me. And the Western media is saying, wow, what a hero. That's a coward to me. To me, that's a coward. You're hiding. You could have fled the city. You could have gone anywhere else, and you chose to hide in there. That's cowardice, right? But it's amazing how they're turning all of these things that, are one thing, right? The racism, the Nazism, the right wing, the extremism, the cowardice, all of that's being turned in the Western media and spun as something that's good, something to be valued. It's not, right? Even the progressivism in Ukraine, it's not something to be valued.
And go ahead.
No, I just want to say that they people are so willing to defend them, but even in a time of war, they are making the lives of people of color more miserable. Like everybody's miserable, but we have to make sure we are making the lives of people of color even worse than what we are going through right now. So it's the country, and we are not talking about like it's the Ukrainian army that is making those people miserable, that they are not allowing them to go on board on trains or to leave, to go across the borders or to like continue their trips to the borders. They are creating a segregation within asylum seeker crisis. So it's insane.
Yeah, I just wanted to add real quick about that Jermaine Terrell Star, that black journalist that lives in Ukraine doing all this propaganda like Nick was talking about and I talked about earlier. He just tweeted today. It was either today or yesterday, but I retweeted it today, but he deleted it already. But he tweeted, he was comparing like, oh, people are calling these Ukrainians Nazis, and he's pretty much saying like people are calling them Nazis and that's racist, and it's comparable to how black people are treated in the United States and how they're discriminated. I'm like, what are you talking about, dude? You're literally just saying that calling someone a Nazi is comparable to discriminating against black people, and this guy's he's black. Like it's just crazy how he's just openly just tweeting this like nothing.
Well, I'm pretty sure someone is paying him very well to say those things. Like he's like probably at some posh apartments in Brooklyn, because he says he lives in Brooklyn, laughing at everybody who is saying, who is justifiably horrified by the absurd he has been saying, trying to defend and to erase the real experiences that Africans and other Black people are going through right now, trying to leave Ukraine.
Yeah, he's a former Atlantic Council guy, and it's clear. It's so clear how a lot of the people who come out of former CIA agents, former Atlantic Council guys, all of a sudden, their accounts become the biggest on social media. They get all the interviews on mainstream media, on CNN, on BBC. These people have again. My issue is I expect there to be propaganda from the West. What I don't expect is for other people who are progressive, who claim to be anti-war, who are saying that we need objective media, are then going to buy into this clearly biased media, clearly biased propaganda, and then pass it off as being anti-war. It's not anti-war. A lot of it's untrue. A lot of it's been proven to be fake. And so, if you want to be an objective media person, be an objective media person. Go to Russia, go to Russian, media, and look at what they're saying, because it's crazy. When you look at the two different sides of the media, it's crazy how vastly different they are. Right? I mean, one
you
side,
can, because they are censored now. You can go to Russian media.
Right now they're censored. It's it's interesting. RT, I had the RT app on my phone, and it doesn't work anymore. I can't get any of the news. I can't look at any of it. It just says like, sorry, it's unavailable. It's crazy, the amount of censorship. And it's funny too, that a lot of the same progressives and social democrats who are big free speech people have been quiet about Russian censorship. They haven't said anything about RT being taken down or even when Press TV was taken down, they you know, it's silence on that, because it's this kind of stuff is okay when it's done to a foreign enemy, but people don't recognize that when it's done to a foreign enemy, yeah, they're going to take those policies and bring it back home and do it to the population right here.
Yeah, and then just to add, like, you know, I do the sports stuff, and now they're doing that propaganda from the sports media perspective. Like, yesterday there was an article about the Klitschko brothers. These are these heavyweight champions that are Ukrainian. One of them is a mayor, but they're apparently deciding to join the fight with Ukraine. So, you know, they're like, oh, this, you know, superstar former boxers are now joining the fight. And then today, Czech Republic and Poland and Sweden are refusing to play Russia in the 2022 World Cup qualifying playoffs next month. The World Cup's coming up this year in Qatar, which there's a lot of problems with that. But so now they're using this, you know, they're using the sports media influence to also paint these narratives.
The Russian ballet is here. I'm in Scotland, and people are making, like, including like progressive groups, they're making a huge campaign to boycott their presentation here. Like, it's a ballet. They are not going to have, like, I'm pretty sure they are not in the army. I'm pretty sure they are not involved in any sorts in the conflict. And it's more ignorant because to think about this point of view, because half of the Russian state ballet is made of people who are from several countries in Eastern Europe, including Ukrainian people.
It's crazy too. You know, talk about like how the population has responded. There have been, I've seen there was an American US like academics at some university who started talking about how we need to remove all Russian students from US universities. We need to have a background check on the nationalities of these students, and, you know, investigate their political views. It's insanity. I mean, this is the type of stuff that, you know, this is the type of stuff we did in World War II. We look back upon and we say, wow, that was a mistake. And we're talking about doing it again, right? This is, you know, what it is ethnic cleansing, right? And it's sort of this xenophobic ideology that's really coming out of people, both liberal and conservative, who are, you know, who are completely ignorant or naive of what's actually going on, of like the political history.
A Labour MP from Wales, I guess, but from Labour. I'm not talking about conservatives. I'm talking about like center, moderate Labour Party. He was suggesting to make people who have like double citizenship, Russian, something else, to choose between those citizenships and to abdicate their Russian nationality. Otherwise, they wouldn't be allowed to stay in the UK in case they were citizens here. So we are talking about something that it reminds me of the Japanese concentration camps that the US kept on during the World War II. Like, we are putting all the Japanese or the Japanese descendants in those camps because they cannot be trusted. And this is something that I can honestly see happening right now, the way things are going, the way things are escalating, of making all Russians seem like they are evil.
And you're already seeing reports in the US and Canada where they're like, businesses are banning vodka and anything related to Russia. Just like when, you know, after 9/11, there were when France didn't want to join the war, it might have been 2003 with Iraq, but they were like starting to call it freedom fries for some reason, just this bullshit. But they're even doing that with vodka, with liquor.
It's aesthetics. It doesn't.
Yeah, I know.
The shit was already bought. Like, it's you have it in your hand. Like the image of the white guy in front of the liquor store. You know, the owner of the liquor store dumping the Russian vodka. Like, it makes for a great video clip. It looks stupid, but it doesn't do anything. It doesn't hurt Russia at all.
To be honestly, it's not. I know it's optics, but in Canada, the finance minister directs the provincial liquor control board to have stores removing Russian vodka and other alcoholic products. This is coming from government. This is not just like a half dozen of like nut jobs. This is something that is coming from the government. Like, this is their level of framing a narrative against Russians.
Yeah. I wanted to touch on a few things. Nick, you were talking a little bit before about, Putin and then the anti-war movement. And a lot of these folks are just very confused. So, like, I think in their minds, they want to be very consistent. Like, okay, Ukraine was a sovereign nation. We know invading another sovereign nation is illegal in terms of international law and norms. And I get that, again, but these issues are very nuanced. And here's the kicker: the United States fucking government does this shit all the time. And so my thing is, especially like take Libya for instance. Libya, where was the anti-war movement in the United States when again, Libya was a sovereign state? Say whatever you want to say about Gaddafi. I personally supported Gaddafi. And again, they had their own internal contradictions. Gaddafi himself had his own contradictions. That's Libya's problem. Libya had to resolve those internal contradictions. That's how nation states work, right? They have a leader, they have a system. It's up to them to be politically self-determined and decide what the fuck they want to do. Do they stay with that leader by force or by elections or by some other way? That's their problem, right? And Libya had Gaddafi had all these different tribal groups basically under control. He had the whole country under control. Libya, in a lot of ways, was very advanced in terms of education and healthcare and infrastructure, so on and so forth. Obama gave the okay to NATO to go ahead and invade Libya and go get Gaddafi, go get the evil guy, go get the bad guy. Going back to Natalia's analogy of the Marvel movie, go get the bad guy, right? Because Gaddafi's eating children and he's raping kids and he's doing all types of stuff. Go get him, right? And what do we have now in Libya? What's going on in Libya? What's going on now in Iraq? I remember the Iraq, same thing, the Iraq war, with Colin Powell going to the UN and waving his little thing and saying, oh, they have the capacity it's the same playbook over and over. But to going back to Putin, so whether or not you agree or not on what Putin did here, right? I have to say, right, just to defend him a little bit in terms, okay, he made a decision, he pulled the trigger, right? That's it. He's going to defend those two breakaway regions. Ukraine keeps getting slick at the mouth, and they could have easily said, okay, let's talk about this, right? You want us to acknowledge those two breakaway? Let's talk about this. What did Ukraine do? This is what the United States do. What did NATO do? Everybody talking that slick shit. Putin said, all right, okay, y'all gonna keep talking that slick shit? And he commanded his troops from the east, north, and south to go and invade. And he's the Russian military. I mean, the precision of it's unbelievable. You have to be impressed at how well they've tried to mitigate loss. And I know I'm gonna get killed. People are gonna say, oh, but innocent, that's one life one innocent life too many. Again, whether you want to defend Putin or not, this happened, and Russia has been talking about this for over a decade, for close to a decade and a half. That where they felt threatened, they have not felt secure, and they have had every single right to make these grievances. And what has NATO done and the U.S. done? Continue to buttress their support there in the Ukraine and say, fuck you, Putin. We don't give a fuck, and we're gonna keep expanding NATO. We're gonna keep doing what we gotta do. We don't give a fuck. Go ahead, Carl, what you gonna do? And at some point, Putin said, look, all right, we're gonna do this. Then you had, we just had the 2 breakaway regions. It's I have to give Putin so much credit, because right now, and the way the West is spinning this is that this war has been less than a week, right? This incursion has been less than a week, and Russia is strategically. If you're watching this almost like let's use sports as an example, Miguel. If you're watching this and pretend this is football, Russia's well positioned right now. Well positioned right now. If you're playing chess, right? If we're watching a football game, you're comparing this to chess. Russia has been very meticulous, very methodical. They have gone after certain infrastructure. They have not tried they have tried to mitigate at all costs, human life. And right now they're sitting in a very good position right now. And we know this, and this is the reason why the Ukrainian president all of a sudden was like, whoa, hold on, let's talk, because this is getting a little scary, right? So I just needed to point that out. But going back to the anti-war folks, I think these folks think that you have to be so that they feel like, okay, you can't, because I've read some of the comments all over the place and stuff like that, and like, whoa, this is Russian imperialism. This is still the invasion of another country, and innocent lives are going to be, taken. This is the game. If you're in politics, this is a wake-up call. If somebody, I'm going to paint this picture. I thought about this. If someone, we're here in the Imperial Court, Natalia, you're over there in the EU. If someone decided, we went through 9/11. I went through 9/11. If someone decided to declare war on the United States, and I don't think anybody's crazy enough, and nobody has the capacity, but let's just say hypothetically, I live here, my daughter's here, my family's here. Am I confused about why would somebody want to do that to the United States after all the countries we've invaded and try to help overthrow? And am I confused about that? And I live here. This is a sober response. This is having a materialist analysis of what's happening. Whether or not I agree, do you think I want to get bombed? I don't want to get killed, right? Who wants to get killed? But this is if you're going to be involved in politics, don't act naive. Don't act naive, And so this is the type of stuff that just drives me crazy, because people think that, we live in this ideal world with, we don't. These are things that are happening, and you have to understand that historical relationship between Russia and Ukraine, what's happening in the eastern region over there in the Ukraine, NATO's response to Russia, the United States response to Russia over the last 20, 30 years. And we're going to be naive and we're like, whoa, Putin's evil. That's you're just going to jump on the imperialist propaganda machine and say, yep, whatever the Western capitalist press is selling me, I'm with it too. I'm going to side with the U.S. on this one. This is Russian imperialism and Putin is evil. This is what I'm hearing from so-called progressives and anti-war folks and would-be allies. If you're going to be involved in this political game, you better be very clear about what's happening. Very clear about what's happening. Anyways, I'll get off my soapbox and wait for somebody's response.
I just want to give news here, to bring some news, because this is something that I'm seeing many people are talking about in the chat. But remember when I said that the Africans in Ukraine, they are like organizing within their diaspora to trying to leave the country. So they have set up a few like Telegram groups and like networks of like social media networks of help. So racist trolls have infiltrated the Telegram group set up to help Nigerians fleeing Ukraine. They have used racist slurs and they are sharing images of brutalized Black bodies. So that's the situation. And I'm sorry for bringing this, and it's just I'm really, really shocked and heartbroken, because if you see some of the videos, it's really, you can see the desperation of those people there.
And that's not Russians not allowing them to leave.
Yeah, no, that's Ukrainians.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, there was I remember seeing the video earlier. Was it earlier this morning where basically they had videos of Ukrainians blocking Africans from getting access to trains. It's it's crazy. It's crazy because like we mentioned earlier, there are funds right now on GoFundMe, on Patreon, which are going to fund these same individuals who are organizing this sort of racism. And when Patreon banned, it wasn't that long ago that Patreon banned the funding to these Nazi groups, and I think a lot of people got upset by that. And I found it interesting that a lot of people were upset by GoFundMe and by Patreon's restriction on right wing extremist groups, but not when it comes to Cuban trying to go through the Cuban blockade. When I forget whether it was Patreon or PayPal who blocked funding that was going to groups that were trying to help Cuban doctors.
Probably PayPal.
Right, PayPal, right, and so and Venmo is the other organization that or the corporation where you can't put Cuba in any of your messages or else it immediately gets blocked or flagged. So all these organizations, for people who are calling out right now the whole thing with Patreon and going to these right-wing organizations, even the Freedom Trucker Convoy like it was before. Also, you have to call out. How can you call out one but not call out what happens when it happens to Cuba or when it happens to Venezuela or Nicaragua? Because that's more common than it is with any of these right-wing groups, right? It's crazy to me that there's so much organization and there's so much manipulation, particularly manipulating of liberals, of progressives, of I think people who otherwise have good intentions, manipulating them to fall in line with these right-wing fascists and far-right extremists, and they have no idea that that's what they're doing. And that's how good the U.S. and really not just the U.S., I would say the EU, the whole entire Western propaganda system, that's how good it is. It gets people who otherwise would, never support these people to support them without even realizing that they are. And it's tough. I think that's, again, like Victor was saying before, this is a big reason why we do these kinds of shows, because we have to try to combat that. But it's really tough when, it's being blasted on mainstream media day in and day out, and people are just being bombarded with this kind of stuff, this sort of propaganda.
So we're at a 1 hour and 15-minute mark. I didn't think we were going to go this long, but this has been a lot of I don't want to say fun, but this has been good. We needed this type of sober analysis to be able to put out there for the public, especially when, again, I'm looking at some of our feeds and we're getting attacked left and right, and so it's hard to respond to a tweet, and get real nuanced. So this is, we needed to do this. But any final thoughts from all three of you? Within again less than within less than 2 minutes, on the situation. Maybe what we hope we can get out of this. Well, maybe what do we think is the best case scenario? What is the worst case scenario? Maybe we can end with that.
Well,
Worst case, go ahead.
No, can I go? You. I spoke too much here, so sorry.
It's all right. I was just gonna say, well, the worst case scenario is if we have I guess World War III, but maybe best case scenario right now, I guess if they could come to an agreement to stop the ceasefire, I guess, or go and come to an agreement to stop fighting, but we'll see, because we know U.S. is right there behind Zelensky's, whispering in his ear, telling him what to do. So we'll see.
Well, regarding the negotiations that Belarus will host for Ukraine and Russia, what Sergei Lavrov said, what are the proposals, is that Russia will start negotiations soon as the Ukraine army to retreat, that Ukraine must be demilitarized, and it must be, all Nazis must go. So those are the Russian demands, that they don't want Nazis in Ukraine anymore. And we know that even though Zelensky is a coward and he's counting on the support of his powerful big friends, that he's not willing to compromise with Putin, because the United States does not want him compromising with Putin, because the European Union doesn't want him compromising, because the European Union is actually fast-tracking Ukraine to be a member of the European Union, even though they are a very impoverished country. But they are doing so just in order of something happening in Ukraine, they would have a legit excuse to use their arms or whatever against Russia. So Russia does not want a war. NATO and the capitalism, the Western capitalism wants a war. But in the worst condition, the worst situation that people are putting is that, what if Putin upsets all the oligarchs in Russia too much and he has to leave power? Well, this would actually be good, because the second biggest party in Russia is the Communist Party. So we would have an actual reason to say, well, I'm 100% supporting Russia now. But in the end of the day, what we have to think about are all those innocent lives who are been impacted by the war, that we're going to have a new refugee crisis. And I'm not just talking about people in Ukraine, but also from all the other countries in the area. And the prices of fuel and gas, that they will go up, and this will be a devastating blow to the working class here in Europe, even especially now after the COVID crisis and everything. So we have to brace ourselves, because tough times are ahead of us.
Yeah, and I would just echo everything Miguel and Natalia had just said. It's all true. The best case scenario, I think, is peace as soon as possible. And the worst case scenario is just ongoing war. And I would urge people to I was, on some of our social media on Anticonquista, I've been trying to get people to recognize that. I would urge people to start your understanding of this crisis at 2014. Start with the fact that Ukraine hasn't been a sovereign nation since 2014. And that if we're going to talk about sovereignty and freedom, the U.S. violated that sovereignty, violated that autonomy several years ago. And right now, Putin's only stated goals have been to restore the sovereignty of Ukraine, to restore that neutrality. If he goes further than that, then maybe you can complain and you can raise hell all you want. But right now, he hasn't gone further than that. Right now, that hasn't happened. Right now, they're really just trying to fight for the neutrality of Ukraine. They're really trying to push back against what has been a U.S. invasion since 2014, trying to undo that invasion. And I'd urge people to understand it from that perspective, from really a Russian perspective, not from a Western perspective, right? Take a view this situation outside of what we're normally used to viewing these wars and these imperialist conflicts from. And you'll be able to see that, there's a little bit more to it. There's more history. There's more context that goes into it. There's people's lives at hand. There are two sides. There's a right-wing side. There's an Azov battalion side. There is a liberal side. There's many Ukrainians who are being forced to fight by the Ukrainian military, right, who are surrendering to Russians. There's many different perspectives to it, and I just urge people to kind of look outside of the stereotypical perspective you get from, Fox News or BBC or MSNBC, and try to understand all the different types of sides, because you'll understand that there's more to this conflict than is really being talked about, right? And the situation, I think, with the students, the Nigerian, the Ecuadorian, and Jamaican students is a great example of just how deep a lot of this gets into, right? How this ties back to Latin America, a place that I don't think most Latin Americans think about any day. Right. Most people probably don't even think about Ukraine for most of the year. but it's deeply connected to our people, and it's deeply connected to the international politics that affect many of our countries and our people.
All right. I'll just say that there is a political solution to this, and I think it's really while the situation is complicated, I think the solution, if you get the right people at the table, is not very complicated. And I don't think that I think that there is a political solution to all of this where we could have peace. Anyway, so we're right there at the 2-hour mark. I really appreciate everybody's time. I try to post the comments that I like the most. And so we appreciate all the comments. We appreciate Natalia joining us and being part of the crew now. And so check us out on all social media platforms. Please check out Miguel at Sports is a Weapon as well on Twitter. Natalia is also on Twitter. I believe, Natalia, you have something like 30,000 followers. So let's continue adding some followers over to Anticonquista, Sports is a Weapon, and Natalia. So until next time, mi gente, we're signing off. Un fuerte abrazo a todos los revolucionarios worldwide, and we're Anticonquista. Peace, and we out.
Later.